She has been working with GS10 for past couple of months. She gives us feedback on our programming. She also gives us some recommendations, and this came out of one of her recommendations that we really wanted to have an event based on this topic. So Audrey is a PhD candidate in the Department of Earth System Sciences, and she will be moderating the event with our speaker. And with that, I'll give it to Audrey. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you, Harinder. So as Harinder mentioned, this is going to be our first Life Beyond the PhD seminar speaker of 2022, Emily Schaller, who received her PhD in planetary science from Caltech. And just a fun fact, Emily's thesis advisor was Mike Brown, who has referred to himself as the man who killed Pluto for being part of the work that determined Pluto was no longer a planet. After her PhD, Emily did a postdoc at the University of Arizona and the University of Hawaii as a NASA Hubble postdoctoral fellow. And in her thesis and postdoc work, she studied the atmospheres of and surfaces of moons and other small bodies in our solar system using large telescopes. And after her postdoc, she was a project manager for the NASA Student Airborne Research Program for 10 years before moving on to her current role as Science Program Director at the HeisenSimons Foundation. And I actually met Emily when she was at the Student Airborne Research Program. I was a participant in the program in 2016. And Emily and the program have both been a big part of my life and my career trajectory ever since then. And Emily and I actually both share dreams of being an astronaut one day. And I know that Emily has applied a couple times and made it pretty far in the process once. So maybe she'll touch on that during her talk today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about her career journey, where she's at now, how she's gotten there, and then we'll have some discussion and some Q&A throughout the presentation. So Emily, please take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Audrey. It's so great to be here. As everyone said, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question. I'm happy to take them. So I guess I will start off with graduate school. So as Audrey mentioned, I was a planetary science graduate student at Caltech, and I really enjoyed doing research while I was there. I studied clouds on Saturn's moon Titan with large telescopes, and I got to go to Hawaii a lot. It was back in the day when you actually had to go to the telescope as opposed to operating it remotely from your living room. Observed in Chile and the Canary Islands, and of course Palomar Observatory. And so I loved observational astronomy, but what I loved even more was going and talking to kids about astronomy, or going and giving public lectures about cool stuff in astronomy. And I didn't quite know how that was going to work out with my career. I even at one point considered, oh, maybe I should just teach fifth grade because that's what I really like. But I sort of decided, and over the course of my PhD, that the probable path for me that felt right was to teach at a small liberal arts college. I had gone to a small liberal arts college myself for undergrad, and so that seemed like the right path to take, especially because my advisor really wanted me to stay in research, and I also had a big splashy result come out my last year of grad school, and had a Nature paper and everything. And so the trajectory that I was on was go get a postdoc. And so that's what I did. I applied for all the prize postdoctoral fellowships and got a Hubble fellowship, took it to the University of Hawaii. And again, did a ton of outreach while I was there, really enjoyed doing that. And then because of a two-body problem, my husband got a job in Arizona. I moved my postdoc to the University of Arizona, where, again, I enjoyed my research there. I was participating in as part of the Cassini teams, studying, now actually studying actual clouds and the surface features of Titan from close up as opposed to with telescopes. And I enjoyed all that, but my heart just wasn't in it. I felt like I had done what I wanted to do with my own research. And so I wanted to share the excitement of science with others. And I didn't know what that looked like. I was sort of browsing job registers here and there, AGU EOS and Earth Science Women's Network and astronomy job registers. And I still had a year and a half left of my postdoc. I did apply to a couple of faculty jobs as well, just because I felt like I should, even though by that point I realized that wasn't what I really wanted. And I ended up, making the short list of at one place. And then they ended up going with somebody who was on their third postdoc. And so I was like, I do not want to be a postdoc for 6 more years, and just keep going along this track, because it just seemed like, there were so few jobs, especially in planetary sciences at the time. There were just not very many. And so every open job that came had, every single person with a PhD in planetary science applying for that, which I think was probably like 50 people or 100 people. And so then it's one job. So it was frustrating and a little bit disheartening. And so, but I still had a year and a half left of my postdoc, so I wasn't super worried at this point. But I happened to one day look at the AGU EOS newsletter, which has a job register on the back page. And there was a job listing for a project manager for NASA in the Earth Science division. And in the description of the job, they said that they wanted somebody with a PhD to help them run education and outreach programs for the Earth Science division, specifically the Airborne Science division of NASA. And I had actually flown on a NASA research aircraft when I was an undergrad during studying the Leonid meteor shower. So I was familiar with the Airborne Science program at NASA. And then they also talked about how they had this new internship that had just started called SARP, the NASA Student Airborne Research Program, and they wanted a director for that. And so I read this job ad just sitting there in my office in Arizona. I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I need to apply for this. And so I applied for it and got offered the job. And I still had, I think at that point, 16 months left in my postdoc. And I told my PhD advisor that I was gonna up and leave this prize postdoc for this job at NASA in education and outreach. And he was like, what are you thinking? And it sort of, I don't know, he was supportive, but at the same time, I think was a little bit surprised that because I was on this track of, having the fancy postdoc and then hopefully then going and getting a faculty position either at a liberal arts college or a research university or something along those lines. But I just kind of knew in my heart that this was the right choice for me. So I up and left my postdoc and started work at NASA Dryden, which is now called NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center, which is up in the desert in Palmdale area. And I really loved it. I loved coordinating the internship program, getting to select undergraduate students from all over the country to get this NASA flight research experience where they flew on board a NASA research aircraft. And at least, and we have 2 of the students who were in my program are here right now. If not more, it's potentially possible because a lot of them ended up at UC Irvine. I can't see the whole screen. But I absolutely loved this position. So the other part of the job, in addition to coordinating the internship program, was coordinating education and outreach for airborne science research campaigns all over the world. So I got to fly to Punta Arenas, Chile, and fly over Antarctica and chat live with 5th graders from on board the NASA research aircraft as we were flying over the South Pole. It was kind of just amazingly perfect. I loved it. I got to interact with kids, and I absolutely never thought I would leave this job. So in November of 2019, I went to Puerto Rico with a good friend of mine who worked at that time for a private family foundation, and the foundation that she worked for was paying for and funding the rebuilding of schools in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And she's my very good friend from undergraduate. And so I just went to Puerto Rico with her to hang out with her and have a fun, time. But I went with her when she went to visit the schools that her foundation had helped rebuild, and talked to the principals while I was there, and told them how they could connect their classrooms to NASA. But at the time, I realized I was really struck by the impact that private philanthropy could have. All these schools were being rebuilt, and new science centers were being put in, and different types of things. And I remember telling her at the time, wow, if there was ever a foundation that did physics, astronomy, climate change, and STEM education, that is the only thing I would leave NASA for. And then in February of 2020, a job was posted on the Earth Science Women's Job Network, which I monitored. Wasn't looking for this at all, but it was this job with the HeisenSimons Foundation. And if you look up the HeisenSimons Foundation, that is exactly what we fund. We fund physics and astronomy, fundamental research in physics and astronomy, climate change, human rights, STEM education. It's an amazing organization. And so I reached out to the recruiter in February of 2020 and said, would the foundation consider remote work? Because I actually live in Bellingham, Washington, with my husband, and I have lived up here for the past 7 years or so. I was able to negotiate that with NASA to allow me to move to Washington State many years before people were actually doing this. So I reached out to the recruiter and asked if they would consider remote work, because the HeisenSimons Foundation is based in the Bay Area of California, and they said absolutely not. The person has to be there in person. So I dropped it because I have had no desire to move. And then, of course, a couple of weeks later, the pandemic happened, and they pulled the job because everything was breaking loose. And I didn't think anything of it. We did a year with the NASA SART program that was all on Zoom and virtual. We managed to adapt different things. And so, my job was continued. Unfortunately, all of the airborne campaigns that year were canceled. So, didn't get to go do any field research really for that year. But then in February of 2021, that same recruiter reached back out to me and said, actually, they are willing to consider remote work and you should apply. So I then applied for the position. It was quite a long interview process, unlike anything I've ever experienced. It went on for about 3 months. There were multiple different interviews with different people at the foundation. They really vet you in philanthropy, and accepted the job in May of last year. They were very wonderful in letting me delay my start date so that I could finish off the summer with my summer internship program. So I didn't want to leave NASA high and dry. And so I started at the beginning of September this past year. And so I've only been there at the HeisenSimons Foundation for 3 months. And my job title is a science program officer. And just to give you a little bit of background about HeisenSimons, so it's a family foundation. Our board members are Mark Heising and Liz Simons and their daughter Caitlin, and we work on their behalf to give away their money to causes that they care about. So I'm part of the science wing of the foundation. We're a pretty small team. There's the director of the science program, and then there are 3 science program officers, of which I am one. And then we have 2 program associates. And so program officers in science, most of us have PhDs and are at varying career stages. So typically folks have done some work in the field, whether that's a postdoc or in the case of one of our program officers, he also worked at NASA for a while, some work in national labs. And this was just this was a career path I had no idea existed, science philanthropy as a thing. And if you Google Science Philanthropy Alliance, you'll see there are all sorts of, there are many different foundations that you've probably heard of because there are buildings at your university that are named after them. So Kresge and Sloan and Packard and then, you know, even bigger ones, Chan Zuckerberg or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And, you know, there's all these different foundations ranging from very big to rather small. And again, so our job is to give away money to different causes. And so I don't know, are there questions yet in the chat? Let me just.
No, not yet. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the types of things that we fund. So last year our budget was $25 million to give away, and this year our budget's actually increasing to $34 million. And so what types of things do we fund? So we fund fundamental research in physics and astronomy. We fund new instruments that are going on the Keck telescope. We fund field campaigns out in Greenland where they want to use seismometers on a glacier to study how it's moving. So we fund a lot of faculty and their laboratory experiments, things like that. So we're considered relatively small. So we, our typical grants, can range anywhere from $50,000 all the way up to maybe a couple million for a large grant. And it's our job as science program officers to find out what's interesting and present to our board, the family, what we think is an interesting thing to fund. And so we don't want to just be kind of a drop in the bucket of what somebody's already funding. The great thing about science philanthropy and private philanthropy is that we can, if somebody has an out of the box idea that maybe they can't get funded by NSF or NASA or whatever, they can come to us and we're able to be a lot more flexible in what we're willing to fund, which is really kind of exciting because it means that people come to us with different ideas and we can make that happen. The other types of things that we fund are increasing programs to increase the number of women and underrepresented students in STEM fields. We fund a lot of women in physics conferences. If you're familiar with, if you're on Twitter and you saw the hashtag Black in Physics Week, that was something that we funded. That was actually my first grant. So we funded the speakers and some of the activities that happened during that week. So there's just a lot of different types of programs that, whether it be in education, we have, it's an interesting place to be because you get to, so I actually went to the AGU, the American Geophysical Union fall meeting in person this past year, which seems shocking now with everything closing down, but there was a sort of 1 week in December where everything before Omicron had hit that, so I went to AGU, and my job there was just to talk to people, go to talks and hear what's interesting and have discussions with people. And it's a very different role than being a scientist yourself. But at the same time, you need to have those skills that you developed. You need to know how to read papers and understand what are interesting problems and things like that. So it's been a really exciting learning experience. Again, I've only been there a few months, so I'm still getting my feet wet and learning all about our different, understanding our portfolios and the types of things that we fund. But it's been a really awesome new direction in my career, and I would encourage you to check out private philanthropy as a potential career path in science. So as far as how to find these types of jobs, sometimes they are posted on various academic job registers that you might already be on, like that's how I found this job. But LinkedIn is a great place for them too. They're often posted there. There's another job register called Work for Good. And so that things are often posted there. I see Jerry just said, how much do you have to worry about fundraising/donations? We don't have to worry about it at all. Our board just gives us money every year and then we give it away. So so they tell us what our budget is for the year, and we've been very fortunate that since the founding of the foundation, our budget has always increased. And so it's just a matter of determining what our priorities are for the year. We also consult, we have an outside science advisory board who we consult, and then presenting our plans for the year to the family, because ultimately it's their money and they want to see that their money is working in the way that they would like it to. So the other thing that's been amazing is just the complete lack of red tape. The other thing that the HeisenSimons funds is a postdoctoral fellowship program. So if anybody is a astronomy or planetary science grad student and is thinking about a postdoc, the 51 Pegasi B fellowship is our postdoctoral fellowship program. So we fund 6 to 8 postdocs every year in astronomy. And I'm now running that program, and our goal with it is to, be a competitor with a Hubble Fellowship. We want people to, when they get a Hubble and get a 51 Peg B, we hope that they'll take the 51 Peg B. And one of the ways that we're doing that is we're making the fellowship very flexible. So in our discretionary fund, you can use it for childcare if you want to. Another thing that happened my first couple of months was I wanted to encourage people were starting to actually have in-person lunches and dinners and things like that. And I wanted to encourage fellows who were at the same institution or who were visiting other institutions to meet up with each other and have science discussions. And so we decided, well, we'll pay for everybody's dinner or lunch if they go out to lunch. And so that literally took me an email to just say, oh, can we have this, can we do this? And then all of a sudden I was able to fund have everybody submit their receipts and get their lunches funded, which is something, from NASA that would never happen, I don't think. But it was just amazing to me that you can have ideas like that and just implement them pretty instantaneously. So other question, were there any skills that you developed during your PhD postdoc training which helped you most in this career path? So I think one of the really important things about this career path in particular is just sort of those soft skills of being able to talk to someone and understand what drives them and what's exciting. I think being able to read scientific papers and understand whether what's being said is clear and just being able to synthesize a lot of information quickly is useful. So Kyle asked, given the name of the fellowship 51 Peg B, is there a preference for applicants to be doing exoplanet research or just astronomy in general? Yeah, there is an exoplanet. It has to be either exoplanets or planetary science. So unfortunately, galactic astronomy or others. Sorry about that. Yeah, that relates to what the family's interest is as well.
Emily, if I can ask,
yeah,
you mentioned having those soft skills and that being able to read scientific papers and taking a lot of information is really useful. Are there other skills that maybe you didn't get in your PhD or postdoc training and have picked up along the way, or just other skills in general that you think are necessary for people in your position to have, or maybe in your previous role as the Student Airborne Research Program Manager?
Yeah, so skills in managing people are really important. I was sort of thrust into that role at NASA without ever having management experience. I did some online courses. There's a project manager certificate thing that I did, but also just organization is very key. You'd be surprised at how many, especially when you're managing groups of scientists, a lot of people are a little bit scatterbrained and all over the place. And so organization and having very clear use of Google Docs and making sure everyone is on the same page was very, very useful to me at NASA, and also has become is very useful here as well. So I would say having some project or program management experience, whether that's just taking an online course and learning about ways to effectively manage people. I also think understanding where different people are coming from and understanding their backgrounds and experiences. I've benefited a lot from various DEI trainings I've taken. And I really feel like, mentorship trainings, any kind of those, anything that's offered to you as far as career development or professional development, especially nowadays where so much stuff is just free and online, just take advantage of that, because you never know when you might need it or how it'll serve you.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Well, we don't have any other questions in the chat right now, but if you want to put anything you're wondering or want to talk to Emily about in there, please feel free. You can also unmute yourself or raise your hand. And maybe while we're waiting for some other questions, you talked a little bit about how there's less red tape in the Private Family Foundation. Are there any other big differences to you, or anything that stands out between your work in federal government versus what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate the freedom aspect of and lack of red tape. It's incredible what can be done quickly in such a sort of nimble organization. I'm trying to think of other things that have surprised me. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm also just been continuously impressed with just how dedicated everyone. I mean, not that folks at NASA aren't dedicated to their work. They obviously are, but everyone is just in our foundation is just so happy to be there and so excited about the work that they're doing, and the ability to really affect change in the world is really an incredible feeling to have. But it's also a great responsibility, because we're the stewards of this family's money, and we want to do a good job in how we distribute it. So it's a heady feeling, especially being there a little while and now having the calibration in my head where there's a grant for $100,000 that we're giving, and that's a small grant, saying, oh, it's only $100,000. Your brain is recalibrated quite quickly as to what different amounts of money are. I mean, not that we're giving out $100,000, flippantly, but it's interesting to see how quickly you start to think about sums of money. So, and I think I probably, in certain cases at NASA as well, I mean, there are huge projects that are multi-millions of dollars, but it is amazing that we can in a matter of weeks or months give a $50,000 grant to something that is important.
Emily, I have a quick question. Are there like different formats for submitting this kind of grant, and or it's one common template for everyone, depending on the money?
So we at HeisenSimons, we do not accept unsolicited grant proposals. So you can't just apply to us for anything. It has to come through a university development office or through, maybe another foundation or some other avenue, or one of us reaches out to you and says, we find this work you're doing interesting, and we'd love you to submit a proposal. And so there's some standardization. We generally will start out with, when we're interested in something, we'll have folks submit what we call a one-pager, which is just basically a one-page thing describing what it is they want to do and a rough outline of the budget. And then we'll evaluate, we get a fair amount of one-pagers, and we'll evaluate those as a team as to what how those fit into our overall goals for the year, and also, the amount of money that we have and things like that. And then from there, we'll then ask for a longer proposal, which, for a conference or a smaller grant might only be 2 or 3 pages, along with the budget. For a larger grant, it might be 5 to 8 pages, something along those lines. We don't make people write tons and tons of text in order to get grants from us. And there's been a push in philanthropy for different foundations to accept proposals that were written for other foundations, so people don't even have to change, which foundation it's for, just to make things easier on folks. And yeah, I mean, we do try and make it as easy as possible for our grantees, especially if we know that this is something we want to fund, and so we work with the grantees to help make it happen. So I see UCI has been a recipient of several grants in the science area: search for exoplanets, tracking ice sheets, and also detecting high energy neutrinos. Also in education. Yep. Co-designing technology with Latinx families to promote playful learning in the city. Exactly. Yeah. So we do work with UC Irvine, as well as many schools in the UC system, to distribute grants, to distribute money. And so one of my first trips was I was up in the Bay Area when I visited the office for the first time, was visiting UC Santa Cruz as well as UC Berkeley, where we fund several programs there. So yeah.
And then we've got another question in the chat from Hasti, asking if you have any tips on how to encourage ourselves to take a less conventional path like you did, because it can be a bit scary.
Yeah, I would say keep watching job registers all the time. So you don't have to be actively, applying to stuff or whatever, but keep your ear out for potential opportunities. Because if I hadn't seen that AGU EOS that had the ad for NASA, I wouldn't have been at NASA. And if I hadn't seen that Earth Science Women's Network job posting for this job and just reached out to the recruiter on a whim, I wouldn't have this job. And so there are so many job registers now. I would also say make a LinkedIn profile. I know it doesn't have to be super filled out, or if you look at my LinkedIn, mine is pretty bad, but at least I'm on there and I would see when different jobs were posted. You can even in LinkedIn, there's sort of a way that you can let recruiters know you're interested in different opportunities. And so it was funny, right immediately after I went to Puerto Rico with my friend, I changed my LinkedIn and said I was interested in program officer positions. And so then I started seeing different program officer positions, and the perfect one didn't come along until I saw then HeisenSimons later down. Anyway, do not use my LinkedIn as an example of what a good LinkedIn is. Mine is like the bare minimum that you should have in a LinkedIn. But yeah, so I guess my advice is just keep your ears out, and things will cross your path, especially now with the job market the way it is, where there are so many new positions. And it's really an employee market. There's really lots of opportunities.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We've got another question in the chat from Marielle asking what the most important components are for a grant application for you.
So for us, we want to make sure that we're not, for HeisenSimons, we don't want to duplicate what is already being done somewhere else or just add on to a big, larger project. For us, we want to kind of be orthogonal to what is happening. So what I would like to see is, for a science grant, something unique, and maybe something that can't be funded by NSF or NASA, or is too early in the process. You have this experimental instrument, and it may work, it may not, but you need this seed money for it. I was even told by someone at the foundation that if a certain percentage of my grants are not failing, then I'm not being visionary enough. So it's sort of a different mindset than NSF or another grant process where you basically know what you're going to you propose, the thing that you're proposing to do, you've probably already done it and you know it works, but it's just, okay, we need money to do this. In our case, we're hoping to kind of push the boundaries of what has been done. And so that's why we, often will expand out into different areas and try new directions and things like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And just a question, kind of taking it back to your responsibilities, approving these grants, looking at these grants, the things you do as a program officer. Can I ask more about what that looks like maybe on a day-to-day for you?
Yeah. So it's right now it's a lot of Zoom meetings. So I'll have Zoom meetings with potential grantees. I'll have Zoom meetings with current grantees to see how things are going and how we can best support them. That's one of the things I have absolutely loved about this foundation is their flexibility with COVID, especially. So, I get to tell our 51 Peg B fellows, which is a 3-year fellowship, but for everyone, we've extended it to 4 years because we realize that everybody is really, being gone through a lot with COVID. And so getting to tell folks that, okay, we're going to do an extension of your grant and don't worry, you don't have to apply for a job for another year. It's all right. So things like that, but then also just having meetings with new grantees, potential grantees. We report to our board once a year. So I actually haven't been there for that, where we give a big presentation about the success and what all we've been funding to the family themselves. And so I know preparing for that will be a big component, but for the most part, and then there's also the time that just reading papers. So just spending time sitting there and reading the literature and investigating a new topic area, and then finding out who should we talk to in this area. It's a lot like a postdoc in some ways, in that you have the freedom to just kind of explore what's cool. Which I really value, getting that time to just sit there and, read Science and Nature and see what's new. I didn't have a lot of time for that at NASA, but it's, so yeah, I would say reading and meetings is kind of the main day-to-day, aspects of the job. And so again, that goes back to a lot of the soft skills too, and then you want to, when you're meeting with folks, especially if sometimes we do these larger collaborations where we'll give a group of grants in a particular area. We want to make sure that the people who we're giving the grants to, work well together, and especially if they're forming a collaboration, we try and, understand how all those personalities work and things like that. So, so that's definitely part of the job. Other questions?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, do we have any more questions from the attendees? You can post in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute.
So I'll ask a question. So by the way, my path was similarly, I worked in industry. I then came back to work at UCI in the School of Engineering, and now I work on corporate research development. So connecting with companies, trying to tell them what UCI is doing in a variety of areas, not just in science, but also in, even though I have a PhD in engineering, I'm representing humanities and arts and so on. So, my advice is also, let your heart guide you. I found that that's what worked for me. So my question to you is, do you see yourself doing this going forward, or how far do you staying in this industry, if you will, for forever, or advancing, or where do you see yourself 10, 20 years from now?
That's an excellent question, because again, as I said, if you had asked me would I ever leave NASA and the position that I had, I would have told you no. So at this point, I love this job. I think it's great. I am super excited to just think about how I can give this money away and best affect change and things like that. So yes, I certainly see myself staying in this field. My dream since childhood was always to be in the astronaut corps. So I even I looked at the bios of every single astronaut who has been selected, and there was typically always somebody who is right out of their PhD that they admit. And so I applied in 2008, which is when I graduated. Didn't make it very far at all. I never heard anything. And so then there was another call for astronauts in 2012, and that was I made it to several rounds. So they called my references. I went to get my astronaut physical, and I was so excited to be getting an astronaut physical. I'm like, oh my God, I'm here, I'm getting my astronaut physical. And of course, I could not get myself to be zen and have my heart rate be low. And so when the doctor measured my heart rate, it was like 81 or something, and my normal resting heart rate is in the 60s, right? And they're like, come on, you have to calm down. And then I think my blood pressure was like 121 over 82 or something, which is, just a little bit high. And so I didn't make it past that round. So my advice to you, if you are considering becoming an astronaut, practice being calm when you are at the doctor, so that you can have good reading there. But yeah, I got cut after the medical round, the first medical round. I applied again in 2016. I was 36 at that point, and didn't make it past anything. And then I applied again in 2020 and didn't hear from them. So at that point I'm 40 and I'm in my 40s. So if you look at who they selected, which of course I did, the oldest was I think 34, 35. So I think I'm out of the running, but good luck to y'all if any of you want to apply. I figure my best chance of going to space is when I'm 85 years old, mortgaging my house and paying Elon Musk or whoever the space tourism agency is to pay for a trip. That's my plan. But yeah, so I did give up on that dream because it didn't happen. But yeah, I mean, definitely when NASA has calls for astronauts, throw your hat in the ring. You never know. Being curious about everything that's going on, reading Science and Nature and reading the articles that are outside of your field just for interest. I would say keeping that curiosity about all science, which we tend to kind of lose in graduate school. We become so hyper-focused on whatever it is we're studying, we stop. And rightly so, it's stressful and you need to read all the papers in your field and things like that. But I would say try to keep your interest in a broad range of sciences, especially if you think that you might want to switch fields, because I started planetary science and then I switched to Earth system science, study. I knew nothing about glaciers or types of sea ice or things like that, and so I had to learn all that stuff. And just being open to learning and being able to quickly read and assess what's going on is a good skill to have. So being able to skim those really dense papers and pull out what's useful. So I would say just keep reading and keep that curiosity.
Thanks, Emily. All right, it looks like we have a little bit more time left, but if there's no more questions, then maybe we can just go ahead and wrap. And thank you one more time for sharing your experience and for your insight and all the advice that you gave us today. We really appreciate it. And I think it helps a lot of people in our positions, and we're glad that you're able to take the time out of your day to do stuff like this. And just one last note that Harinder linked Emily's LinkedIn in the chat if anyone's interested. I guess, as Emily said, maybe don't use it as a template for your own LinkedIn, but good to stay connected and see what she's up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has any questions about, applying for jobs in philanthropy, I was really lucky that I had this friend who was already a program officer, and she kind of completely revamped my resume because I had a CV, like a normal academic CV that was 18 pages long, and she's like, no, this is not what we need right now. So yeah, definitely, if you are applying for outside jobs, get someone who's in that field to look at what you're submitting as far as a CV or resume, and have them tell you whether that's normal in that field.